The rise of China presents a challenge to India. It's the first time we have a superpower at our doorstep. Joining me now is Dr. Arzan Tarapore, research scholar at Stanford University's Center for International Cooperation and Security. Dr. Tarapore, welcome to NSA. Dr. Tarapore, Bangladesh's chief advisor Mohammad Yunus was in Beijing recently. You just heard about that. A lot of agreements were signed. There's also an open invitation to China to come into Bangladesh for possibly a Bangladeshi version of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. The principal advisor also mentioned the fact that India's 7 sisters were landlocked. How do you view this?
Thanks very much again for having me on. Look, if it is a Bangladesh version of CPEC, then we should all breathe a sigh of relief because that's not going anywhere. So that would actually be a poisoned chalice for China. And let me also reiterate that China already has access to the Bay of Bengal, right? So this is not something that Bangladesh is just now giving to the Chinese. And this is a long-standing Chinese position. But let me zoom out a little bit. I'm not an expert on Bangladesh politics or what is exactly driving this. It could be the benign interpretation of this is it could just be a plea from Bangladesh for greater trade connectivity with China, because China is an economy you cannot ignore, especially when you are living so close to it. So it could just be a matter of trade connectivity. But here's the sort of sharper point that I would draw. And that is that this is what great power competition looks like, right? So when some people in India, for example, celebrated the inauguration of President Trump because he was going to take on the deep state and he was going to withdraw American interference from around the world, this is what that looks like. When the US withdraws from parts of the world and demonstrates that it is not interested in maintaining the same types of activities that it has traditionally maintained around the world, including in South Asia, this is the result. Now, I'm not making this as a normative judgment, but some people have suggested that this is a moment of opportunity for India because India may be able to thrive in the disruption that this realignment of American policy brings. And maybe India will thrive in this disruption. But maybe when you're competing with an economy that is 4 or 5 times larger and a military that is much more capable, and small countries in the region that have the opportunity to engage with China, then this is what that great power competition without active American involvement looks like.
Dr. Tarapore, both India and China have disengaged militarily in Ladakh, and there's talk of a return to pre-2020 level ties, economic ties included. You made the point in a recent editorial that for India to have stable ties with China, it must deter China militarily. You seen anything that suggests that India isn't doing enough to deter China militarily and possibly making the same mistakes that India did in the past?
Now, as far as India's deterrent posture goes, look, building deterrence is not easy. It's not something that, when especially countries like the US talk about restoring deterrence with an airstrike here or there, that's not how deterrence is restored. That's not how deterrence is built. Deterrence is built through a long, arduous, expensive, and complex process of building military capability. Now, India's done a lot of that, especially since 2020, prior to 2020, but especially since the Ladakh crisis began in the summer of 2020. And it's not clear, we don't know what the deterrent picture is. It's the sort of problem in international affairs that you don't know what level of deterrence you have until it is tested. But what we can say is that it certainly did not have deterrence in 2020. It did not have deterrence even during the crisis when there were other additional probes, both in Ladakh and in Arunachal Pradesh. And so I am skeptical that China is deterred because for all the military reinforcement and upgrades that India has undertaken, which is speedy and significant, China's upgrades and reinforcement are even speedier and even more significant. So, we won't be able to say definitively what the deterrent balance is on the border. But what I would say is 2 points. Number one, you can never have enough deterrence. You can never be sure that you have enough deterrence, and so there is always work to be done. And the second point I would make is that it's not just about the border. China poses challenges to India, and again, not just India. This is not an India problem. China poses problems to countries of the region that are not just on their border. In India's case, it is a multi-theater, multi-domain challenge that India faces. And so therefore, it behooves India to build deterrent capability not only on the LAC, but also in the Indian Ocean. Not only on the ground, but also in the cyber domain, etc., etc.
Tough decisions that India has to make given the fact that we've never faced a simultaneous land and maritime threat. Important points there, Dr. Arzan Tarapore. Thank you for joining us.